Then 6. Know all people as thy brethren and treat them as such. The perfection of human nobility lies in the devotee being always within the sphere of devotion. All things descend from the origin should be treated as coming from the same source. Underline that. All things descending from the origin should be treated as coming from the same source. Just as children born of the same mother are related to one another, so are all bound together by the same common ties of brotherliness and are related to each other in the same way. The underlying sense has never been fully grasped. All are connected with the same reality, the central point, by the effect of motion which set everything into action. So all are connected to the center. No substantial disconnection existed between them. It was all really the effect of our own thoughts and actions that converted brothers and friends into strangers. It was due to our own feelings of selfishness that make them appear like aliens. So this is fairly straightforward. We all came from the same center point, but because of our actions, you remember when we assert individuality, we get alienated. That is what has happened. Every soul has asserted its individuality, and that has created issues. By the effect of our own thoughts and actions, we have converted brothers and friends into strangers. It was because of the feeling of selfishness that made them appear like aliens. This endangered separative feelings must now therefore be removed to that brotherly relations so that brotherly relations may be revived. This is one of the wheels which enshrouds a devotee. So the wheel of selfishness, the wheel of selfishness and the ego. This is one of the wheels that needs to be removed. Just as the feeling of remoteness set in by itself among the members of the family when the number increases, in the same way, our brothers and relatives begin to appear more and more remote by the lapse of time and distance, and the state, which is common to all, vanishes from the sphere of thought. So, if ನೋಡಿದಿರಾ, as and when the family expands, ಅಲ್ಲ, we have only a limited circle with which we actually are in contact with. When the family expands, then the previous circle actually changes. We have all undergone that. Once you get married, then the sphere of the family changes. Then your wife and their relatives, their first circle now becomes your extended circle. Some of your relatives drop off gradually. So the circle keeps changing as we evolve. And we have a limited circle. Okay. So with the lapse of time and distance, there is a feeling of remoteness that develops. And this happens naturally. It's not that you want to feel remote, but it just happens naturally. You will feel remote. So the state which is common to all vanishes from the sphere of the thought. Only its solid form remains to view, which we begin to love as far as we can. So what happens is that solid form, that remembrance of the past, that is how we spent our time. So it's more like a nostalgia. Okay. So Shahabad nostalgia. You remember the past, and then somehow that solid form is kind of there in your mind now. That's the remembrance. Okay. But love includes within it a latent feeling of enmity. So the current of thought began to settle down and affect it adversely. So when our thought is not, what do you say, aligning or resting on the feeling of love that we feel when we feel close to somebody. Now, as and when the feeling of remoteness develops, our thought rests on that. When the thought starts resting on the feeling of remoteness, then we are actually strengthening the feeling of enmity. Remember one thing, when there is close contact, there is a feeling of love that is felt. So there is a feeling of oneness that is felt. So our thoughts settle on that. And then you continue to kind of nurture that. When we actually go to the next state, where they are now becoming more and more remote, because they are now out of the sphere of our thought. The past experience has now become solidified, and there is a feeling of remoteness now, since they are no longer within the sphere of our influence or of our feeling. Then what happens? The thought of love also has a thought of enmity along with it. So if the mind is not settling on the thought of love, it now settles on the feeling of enmity. That is what happens. In other words, when you feel that the love has not been fulfilled, gradually it converts into enmity. In fact, it's a very wonderful thing that psychotherapy is based on this. Psychotherapy says that Freudian psychotherapy, everybody loves everyone. It is when the feeling of love is not allowed to be expressed or experienced, it gets converted into enmity. In fact, every other feeling is a modification of love, which is the basic feeling. That's what we say in the psychotherapy. Every other emotion is nothing but the modification of love, which is the basic feeling or emotion. This is one of the things in psychotherapy. Okay. If somebody is feeling sad, somebody is feeling angry, somebody is feeling hate, jealousy, every feeling is nothing but love modified into something else. Suppose you love somebody very strongly, even if they make small errors, you'll be very angry at them. Because love actually takes a person to perfection. The more you love somebody, the more you want to see them perfect. Love itself is emanating from perfection, from the center. That's the state from which love is emanating. So when you love somebody, you want to see perfection in them. And even if they err a little bit, you are actually very angry with them. And that anger is disproportionate to the mistake that they have done. We have all experienced this, right? So if you don't love somebody so intensely, what happens is that you're okay with it. If somebody does mistake, you will not bother about it. You will be okay. What has now happened is when the love becomes intense, what is supposed to be something which is free flowing and going in all directions to everyone in the sphere of your influence, now gets confined to one person. Okay. Now, say there are two people and they love each other. They love each other so intensely that where is that extra force of love coming in? The extra force of love is coming in because they have withdrawn the love from other sources, other people, other things. So they have withdrawn the love and then redirected love in one direction. Okay. When the love is redirected in one direction, what happens is that you become very possessive of that particular person. They have to think like what you think, they have to do what you say, they have to dress like what you ask them to. It's almost like that kind of a love, which is possessive in nature, rather than freeing you, actually makes you a prisoner. This is what happens in many people who love very intensely. And however much we want to see our lover being perfect because of the intense love that we have got, they are not perfect because they have never traveled towards perfection. They've never done anything to go towards perfection, right? So what then happens is most of the love marriages actually end up in failure many times. The simple reason is that before marriage, they were seeing all the signs of perfection in that particular person. After marriage, once they see that those signs are not really there, they start getting disappointed. Initially, they will be seeking appointment before marriage. Post marriage, they will always be in disappointment. So one is seeking appointment, other one is disappointment. Once you start getting disappointment, you start missing the appointments. Once you start missing the appointments, then the marriage goes for a toss. This is exactly what happens. Which is why, if you just look at anecdotally, love marriages have a higher chance of failure than arranged marriages. In arranged marriages, you are happy to give that long rope to the other person because you are also getting to know them in the first few years. But in love marriage, you seem to think that at the marriage itself, you already know the person. And if the person do not act according to what you know of them post marriage, you will start getting disappointed pretty early in marriage because you are not ready to give that long rope. So most of the time, within a matter of few weeks to few months, they start quarreling post marriage. People who were lovers before marriage, they start quarreling. There is also a realization that common complaint that we hear from these couples is that this person did not turn out to be the way that I taught him or her to be. In other words, the love clouds your mind to such an extent that you have the ideal version of the person created in your mind, not the real person who is there in front of you. What you got in your mind is the ideal version of that particular person. And post marriage, there is a clash in your mind between the person that you are seeing now, practically, versus the ideal person that you had in your mind. So the clash that is occurring inside your mind now appears as clash outside when you start fighting with the other person. The clash is not actually occurring outside, the clash is occurring in your mind, inside, between two versions of the same person that you got. One version that you are now seeing practically, other version is the ideal that you had held in the mind. They don't match. When they don't match, the mind is unsettled. Mind had settled on the ideal version of the person that you are loving. And mind was at rest and happy. Now you get to see this person in a different light. There is a mismatch between the ideal and the version, the current version that you are seeing. So the mind is now forcibly separated from the ideal version. So the mind is not settled neither on the ideal version nor on the current version that you are seeing. So the mind is like neither on this nor on that. When the mind is unsettled from both these versions, the mind is disturbed, restless, irritable, not sleeping, not able to do the work, not able to focus. All things happen when mind is settled. When is it that you have good confidence? When is it that you have good self belief, self esteem? So everything, every positive quality comes when the mind is settled on a particular thing. If you keep dislodging the mind from one thing to another, the mind will not give you the feeling of settledness. So Babuji, in fact, Lalaji writes, happiness lies in the feeling of settledness of the mind. That's the source of happiness. When the mind settles on something substantially for a longer period of time, you feel happy. That is what is necessary for happiness to be felt. Okay. Now, what we do in meditation and spirituality is that we know that when the mind settles on temporary things, it will feel happy temporarily. After that, it will get dislodged from that, and then again it will feel unhappy. So, what we do in meditation is we gradually train the mind to settle on that thing which is permanent. That is what we are doing. We are allowing the mind to settle on something which is permanent. Now, this permanent thing is such that not only it allows the mind to settle, it in a way swallows up the mind only. The mind gets merged into that permanent thing because mind is an offshoot of that permanent thing. Now, in terms of whatever maxim we have read in the past, tell me where does the mind go to and what happens to it? ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಲವರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನಾ ಹೇಳೋಣ ಅಂತಿದ್ದೆ ನೀವು ಮೈಂಡ್ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿ ಅಂತ ನನಗಿನ್ನೂ ಅನುಭವ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೇನೆ. We read about it. What is the origin of the mind?
Oneness with God.
That is the objective that you are actually striving for. But where does the mind originate? Published is written in the last two maxims.
Where ಅಂದ್ರೆ in terms of what exactly? Like
In terms of creation, I told you whatever is there in the macrocosm is there in the microcosm.
the first mind you meant.
But where is the origin of the first mind?
I remember the sequence that there was. I think mind came after time.
That is different. That is a slightly different analogy. But where did the mind come from? Go back to creation. Now, in creation, where does the mind come from? What is there next to creation?
Dormant will of God, that which created the stir.
Where does the dormant will of God act on?
The stir.
It
I mean,
causes the stir, but where does it act on to cause the stir?
latent motion.
Motion, correct. So what was there in the at the start? There was the center and the latent motion next to one another. Then the dormant will of God got activated. It created a stir in the latent motion. The stir in the latent motion allowed the powers to gush forth from the latent motion. That is what happens. It's almost like it opened the thing and whatever was inside in the latent motion, it just kind of sprung forth. Now, of these things, what is the origin of human mind? So there are four things now: the center, the latent motion, the stir, and the powers which have now come out. Of these four, which is the human mind?
The power.
Thoughts,
Sorry?
Power.
thoughts,
Thoughts is a later thing that comes. Of these four, one of them is the reason for the human mind. Just think about it. Which can be the thing for a human mind? It cannot be the center, right? It cannot be the latent motion. Then you have two other things, the power and the stir.
Only option left, stir.
Correct. That's all.
stir,
The stir or the shob near the center is descended into every human being and that became the mind. So every time you are using the mind, you are actually relating to the stir. When you use the mind, you feel the power of the stir. Does it make sense? Latent motion mein there is no action. It's just like latent. It's like water standing still. There is latent motion in that standing water. It's almost like you can say it's a potential energy. Latent motion is like a potential energy. So when I drop something into that standstill water, then the water moves. Where did the water move from? The potential energy is now disturbed. It manifests as kinetic energy. That's the waves that you see. Can you relate to this? There is potential energy. The moment you drop something, suppose you put a leaf or a stone into that standstill water, you see that the waves start moving out. The rings that you see, no? Now, where did that come from? It came because the water had potential energy with it. When the potential energy was disturbed by the stone or the whatever it fell into the water, the potential energy started manifesting as kinetic energy. Even now, you are sitting quietly. Some thought comes and you will that, okay, let me get up and go and do badminton. What is happening here? The potential energy was there inside. Now, once that thought of the badminton drops into your mind, it gets manifested into kinetic energy. You get up and start going towards badminton. That energy is already there. It is just that particular willing of doing a particular thing creates that energy, and then it converts that energy from one form to another form, and then you start proceeding towards that. Okay. Now, suppose there is a person who's depressed. They get the thought that I need to go and play badminton, but they don't get up and go and play the badminton. What is the problem?
They have energy shortage because
Energy is there. It appears that they have shortage of energy.
uh,
Sometimes they also complain of tiredness. And what is the reason for the tiredness and what is the reason for their will not to manifest?
a lot of samskaras are already pulling their energy.
Okay, so what happens? The samskaras. So samskaras are there, a lot of samskaras are there. What are they doing?
They're just blocking the
One is they're blocking. Second one is what is happening to the energy. What do you
hierkodadu.
mean?
Uh, I mean, absorbing all the energy.
Correct. So two things the samskaras do. They absorb all the energy, so the person will feel tired. One thing. Second thing is that they actually block the flow of this particular thought or will from going to the body. See, you might get the thought or a will in the mind. It has to now go through the pranamaya kosha into the annamaya kosha, and it's the annamaya kosha is supposed to act. So you will something, and if it's not able to pass through the layer of the mind into the body cannot act. For the body to act on some particular thought that you got, you need to have energy in the body. And you should have that free flow of the thought to the body so that the body can get activated and then they can actually do what is being built. So when the samskaras block it, you have the thought, but it cannot pass through that. So you keep willing in the mind, but nothing happens at the body level. Secondly, the energy is now drained off by the samskaras. So the body does not have enough energy. Even if you were to force yourself to get this thought to pass through all the samskaras and reach the body does not have the energy necessary for that. See how important this is as far as samskaras are concerned. So when the samskaras are removed, what are you doing? Even without pranahuti, when the samskaras are removed, what is happening?
Free flow of energy.
There is free flow of energy part will come later on. There is no blockages. You are unblocking. That's the first thing. Secondly, that energy which was now going to the samskaras is now available to your system for functioning. So you benefit from both. There is free flow of the thought to the body so that the body can act. Secondly, the samskaras no longer drain the energy. So you actually get that energy which is now available to you. Thirdly, the chakras themselves are nature's mechanism to conserve the flow of the energy from the center to the first point. So there are 13 chakras. At each chakra, some amount of energy is conserved and only rest of the energy is allowed to pass to the next chakra. So when the samskaras are removed and the chakras start actually opening up because of the work of the meditation, you have more energy now. That's the third source of energy. Then what happens? You are given pranahuti. Now that adds more energy. So just see, when you take regular sittings, what is supposed to happen? The samskaras are removed, so the blockages are removed. The energy which was draining into the samskaras are now available for your work. The chakras start opening up, so you get energy from there. And then pranahuti is given, you get energy from that also. That is why in our system, the sittings that you take is the most important thing as far as your journey is concerned. Got the point? Now, you might be able to do meditation on your own, but none of these things will happen so fast. It takes time for us to draw our own pranahuti. Okay? Initially, we are not capable of doing that. Secondly, we will not be able to open up the chakras in the same way because we cannot deep clean our samskaras. You can only surface clean the samskaras. We cannot do the deep cleaning. Okay? It's like we washing our own car. We can wash it on the surface, but we cannot do the deep wash. Right? It's only the deep wash that actually makes the vehicle enabled for higher performance. Just washing the surface of the body of the car is not going to make its performance better. Right? So that is what is going to happen. So when you take the sittings, when you attend the satsangs and the bhandaras, that is when you actually get the deep cleaning. That is when you get a higher dose of transmission. So four things needs to happen as far as your journey is concerned in every sitting. Samskaras to be removed, the energy to be conserved in terms of not allowing that energy to be drained off by the samskaras. That happens simultaneously. The moment the samskaras are clean, energy is now conserved in the system. That energy is now available. Then the chakras will start opening up. That releases energy. Lastly, prana is given. That is also something which is going to aid the journey. Four things. And this should hammer in your mind, into your mind about the importance of the sittings. The more regular the sittings are, the better it is. Okay. So coming up to 7:12, let me just finish this. The remoteness. Everything began to appear differently and affected separation from one another. All this contributed to the formation of our individual network, and on account of which we lost consciousness of the currents that flow into every being, appearing in man in the form of feelings. Now underline this. The currents that flow into every being appears in man as in the form of feelings. Now what is it that we ask after meditation? After meditation, what do we ask?
What did you observe? What did you feel?
We ask for your feelings. And what is the feelings related to? The currents that flow into every being from the origin. That is the origin of the feelings. So now, when you meditate and you start becoming aware of those feelings, what are you becoming aware of? You are becoming aware of those currents which is coming from the origin, which is manifesting in us in the form of feelings. Now you are relating the feelings to the divine currents. Can you see the relationship between the feelings and the divine current? We have become totally oblivious to the divine current. Now, with meditation, we become aware of those divine currents in the form of feelings. That is what happens. You remember, we kept talking about the center being there in us, the latent motion there being in us, the kshob in the form of mind, and the powers. The powers are also nothing but the divine currents coming from the center, from the kshob. Those divine currents or those powers which descend into our heart is there in the form of feelings. And it is that you become sensitive to during the meditation. So you catch hold of the feelings. Where do you go? You go to the origin of the feelings. What is that? Which is the kshob. You catch hold of the currents, you go towards the kshob. Then you cross the kshob, you end up in latent motion. Once you end up in latent motion, you start absorbing the essence of the center and your journey is finished. That's all the journey. It's so easy. You start aligning to the feelings. When you start aligning to the feelings in your microcosm, you are essentially aligning to the divine currents of the macrocosm. Okay. Now, when you cross through the course of the feelings and go towards the show, which is the origin of the feelings, you are going to the bottom of the mind, the root force which is there in the mind. Now, you cross the level of the mind into the latent motion. In the macrocosm, you cross the show into the latent motion. So, in other words, in the microcosm, you cross the layer of the mind, you go to something deeper. There, you are now starting to be in alignment with the latent motion. There in the latent motion, you start absorbing the essence of the center. Here inside, once we go beyond the level of the mind, we start absorbing what is there. What we absorb in the depths of our own meditation is the essence of divinity. That's why in every session of meditation, we become more and more divine by absorbing that divinity, the essence of divinity, which is there in that state, which is beyond the mind. Does it make sense? Macrocosm versus microcosm. So eventually, we absorb so much of divinity, the essence of the center, that we are no longer the individual that we are. We will be akin to the center. We will be like the center. Then we say that this person has now reached the highest state. Okay. But remember these two things. The kshob is manifested as mind. The divine current has manifested as feelings.
What does divine current mean exactly? How does it look like?
When you drop a stone into the standstill lake, the waves are formed, it starts going out. That is the current. The flow of this wave is the current that you're talking about. When you see this phenomenon happening in front of your eyes, you see that there is a current of energy flowing out from where the stone fell towards the outward direction. That is the current. So there is one paradox in this that you people have not been able to catch. We'll discuss about it on Monday. The paradox in this model that we are now discussing. You're not able to catch, not to worry. We will catch hold of it on Monday. Okay. To catch hold of the paradox, people have to move out of the orthodox. Then you can catch hold of the paradox.
Can you tell the paradox? We might forget otherwise.
Sorry?
Can you tell the paradox?
Uh-huh. You ponder about it. You have one weekend to ponder on the paradox. Anyway, so you have enough time to